Hello and most welcome to 1713. And I will continue my go-through I started in 1712. And we've been discussing the limits of the life world of language as such, and what the consequences for that is. The limits of language is the limits of the world. That might sound like some sort of that things would be not infinite, expansive. The frontiers would be limits in the sense there will be not enough room. We will not be able to do as we want or care. It simply will not be enough. But what it's pointing to is rather that inside of it there is an infinity, never ending, indeterminate amounts of connections, relations. In an ongoing movement, I call it. Let me take this with a more paradox and recast that in terms of brain states. Or I'll read directly from 156, but the question here is, how do thinking, awareness, consciousness relate to brain states? Is there a one-to-one relationship that we can read from the brain state what the person is thinking? This is a bit analogous to the idea that what one says is exactly what one has been thinking in one's inner speech. A sort of identity, or as a germ, as a seed of the whole thing, where it just has to be developed, rolled out, going from the implicit to the explicit. I think David Bohm's idea of implicit, explicit is rather fitting for that idea of the germ, which is questioned, as you will see later here by Wittgenstein. And the first bit is, you cannot have a proposition that is logically equivalent to the utterance "I believe" because of the duck rabbit. This can be illustrated by trying to recast Moore's paradox in terms of brain states. For if the utterance did say something about the individual state, this should be reproducible in terms of the brain instead of the mind. However, any statement about someone's brain is logically independent of any statement about the outside world. So no statement of the form "my brain is in state A and the world is in state E, Z, would ever be a contradiction. For this reason, no assertion about the state of mind or anyone else's brain is equivalent to the assertion that I believe, for example, he will come. As this shows, the problem with Moore's paradox is that it ignores the relationship between the subject and her utterances. An assertion, whether or not prefixed by the words "I believe," is an expression of belief, not a rapport on it. Big difference there, remember that one. And the individual undermines her role as the subject if she tries to adopt the same relation to her belief as to that of others. While the supposition that she believes something may be expressed as two unrelated propositions. Versus that a certain mental state pertains in her, and a particular state of affairs outside her. This is not true of the assertion. There the two propositions are not independent. For the assertion that this is going inside of me asserts this is going on outside me. The concept of belief is based around the privileged first person use, where the individual expresses her belief rather than reports on it. So a belief is something you express. You don't report that you have such and such certain belief. You do it at the same time. If she does try to assess it, the result is nonsense, or rather is as if two people were speaking through the same mouth. One of them expressing the belief, the other confirming or denying it. This may explain why Moore's paradox arises, but it still leaves it unclear why the individual cannot adopt the same relation to her self as she adopts toward others. So do note here, this is the grammatical difference between first person perspective and third person perspective. Once more, as in the lecture 1711 before. And it's not a matter of having access to an innerness. It's rather the outer relation. There's a quote that might help. How is it that I cannot gather that I believe it is going to rain from my own statement? It's going to rain. can I then draw no interesting conclusions from the fact that I said this? If someone else says it, I conclude perhaps that he will take an umbrella with him. Why not in my own case? The natural suggestion is that the individual does not need to draw conclusions from her own words because she is directly acquainted with the mental state which is the source. But this misses the point. For it suggests that the individual knows is what the individual knows is of the same kind as what others know. In the classic formulation, the individual knows her state directly. Others know it indirectly. However, this idea of knowledge and observation reduces the individual to a nonsensical passivity in relation to herself. The point is not that the individual has more information on which to base her hypothesis about how she shall act, but that it is she who decides, and this is important, she decides how to act, and so has no need of hypothesis at all. What would be the point of my drawing conclusions from my own words to my behavior? When in any case I know what I believe. it is not manifested precisely in this, that I do not infer my behavior from my words. That is the fact. The fundamental point is that the individual's point of view is not a relation to herself of observation. The individual does not have to infer her intentions from her acts. Rather, as an agent, she forms intentions. And I think that's important in comparison also to what we say, having an attitude towards. That is also something you form. You do not do introspection to see whether you believe in something or form a proposition inside of yourself. You are the first person and you do the attitude. That's how it is. I think it couldn't be more different from opinion than anything. Not even a piece of wood could be more different. I speak of the furthest distance there is. And this, of course, infers great problems to the idea that there is an equivalence between brain state and what you think, what you intend, what you feel. In a very short word, it neglects all of the life world and makes everything incredibly small and narrow beyond belief. That would be called in physics local reality. That in this small room in which I presently preside is all there is in this world, and therefore that would be enough to decide anything and everything of what's happening in the room. So once more, what's acting up here is the dream of the secluded, cut off innerness, unconnected to anything on the outside. And language only happened to arbitrarily connect somehow in a representational system to the world. And now when we've gone through the book once, everything is out there and recorded, this slowly is coming into place. The interconnectedness is the grammar of the world. It is sort of somewhere in the interaction between language and world, a development has taken place, and that's the carving up of the distances, the disjuncts, the differences, the areas of the language game. I think some people would object that if you go too far in this absolving of the inner and outer, the subject itself would disappear. It's very far from the case. I don't think it would be suitable to use the word subject, but me or whatever is made of very different things, and only a few of them has the property of being inner and not outer, or inner only if there is such a thing. There are completely different problems with the old model, because there, of course, you are a secluded, locked-in subject. But looking closer, what at the very outset seems rather promising has its problems. You cannot really reach into this promised insight. And the outside seemed too distanced for one ever to have some connection to it, since the words, as I said earlier, are absolutely unconnected to reality, like signs and signified. Like they developed individually in different parts of the universe, or maybe not even in the same universe. I think René Descartes could be used as a parallel, although the example is different. His res cogitans, or the soul, only does its verbal thinking or image thinking in the same pace as the body. But there is really no connection. I think Descartes was clear enough to admit that some sort of made-up causality wouldn't help. And this is what one discovers as one goes deeper into this. And that is that although causality seems to be deciding, being something decisive and helping the understanding, it is actually just covering things up. It's a sort of label. Once you go deeper, you see it's not really helpful. It doesn't really fit. Like putting a stamp that's larger than the letter on the letter. There's no grand fit at all. There's some other pointing here about utterances or Äußerung. Äußerungen, page 158. So far we have dealt with the basic form of our various psychological concepts. But we also play more sophisticated games. Utterances such as I believe or I intend are not based on observation. But even these concepts can on occasion be used in a different way. In fact, it is not even true that all first-person uses of psychological concepts are utterances, Äußerungen. For example, there are what Wittgenstein calls functional states. Here, the individual observes herself and may note that she is reacting in a particular way. For example, that she is irritable or liable to switch from one mode to another. At the slightest excuse. Such reports contrasts with utterances, that is, pain expressions, in that they are not manifestations of the state involved. There are also concepts which include both an utterance and a report. For example, while I'm furious is generally an expression of anger, I'm angry is rarely one. The difference here is that I'm furious is not an expression of self-observation. Listen now to the parallel of saying, I believe, or I have an attitude, or you just do the attitude. It's not a self-observation, and therefore it's not propositional. It's part of the anger, if you like. The difference here is that I am furious is not an expression of self-observation. It is the direct expression of the anger itself, the anger, as it were, bubbles over into the exclamation itself. By contrast, I'm angry may be said in a tone of surprise by someone who suddenly notices that she has become quite worked up about something that does not merit it. So it's, in a way, that's the same theme repeating itself in the different parts of Johnston's book. But don't be fooled to think that they are similar. No, there are substantial differences. Johnston's book, neither any book of Wittgenstein, can be summarized. Everything would then be lost. It needs to come in this order, and it doesn't go from the big picture to a more detailed vision. It's more like a vortex, seems to go back the same alley, and it almost hints at similarity, but it opens up for new differences. As I mentioned in 1712, that some of these dispositions have duration. Some there wouldn't be a need, or would be impossible to understand if a question of how long did you have that belief, or how long did you hope that. So he identifies these things in detail, describes them. And that description is no explanation. It's solely about what actually takes place. And I can imagine by now explanations seem to it's not keeping its value anymore. It's slowly sinking away. Not being able to enforce its power over us. Becomes less and less. And this is a good thing. It means that the grip it used to have is loosening up. Its fingers are not holding us tight. And I would say that grip is quite literal. because it's a fixatedness of the explanation, will also be tight fists, tensed knees and so on. It will not be relaxed in any way. And to further exaggerate and put in a hyperbole, it's like almost, we seem to think to that you need to do an empirical investigation of your inner to make a good bet if you believe that your house is on fire because that there is a smoke coming from that direction. That's just nonsensical. The get here problem makes no sense whatsoever. Makes a certain sense because it's a confusion of what looks like similar forms. And thereby one could actually say that the problem is solved. This is how, if it was Gettier, whoever that was, this is what Gettier mistook. And here's another example. We speak about hope still here, page 159, and this is sort of amplification coming from Johnston. The difference can be underlined by considering the case of forgiveness. For the phrase, I forgive you, is an expression of forgiveness and does not mean I am engaged in a particular process, namely that of forgiving you. You could, though, say, gradually I'm coming to forgive her, or I'm trying to forgive her. Here, one really might talk of a process, and so of description and observation. And what could happen is that you take up a third person perspective on your own doings. But that relation will be strictly other. It will not have the same influence on you. Well, it couldn't. It couldn't have the same influence. It's on a newly created level. This could accurately more or less be compared to the different levels in language game. Speaking of your thinking as it was an inner speech is how you talk to other. I was planning this and that. For a certain relation instigating this. But not that to describe empirically your inner state. That is not what it is about. And one could also say in conclusion here that we don't have that fantastic access to our own past. What did I do before? That almost invites a sort of empirical quest. But since there is no engravings inside of us, a memory of that sort to investigate, that simply would not work. We are not made up that way. It's a false parallel to the first person perspective towards the third person perspective. Or why not, as I usually say, technological thinking. Machines always have a purpose. We do not in that way. We were not constructed. And I end here and I say thank you very much. Have a very pleasant morning, night or evening, wherever you are. Bye bye.